Allara Stark has said goodbye to the future she knew. She has traveled back to the past to prevent the War of the Five Kings, to keep the realm united to fight the Second Long Night, and her mission begins now. Welcome to TH Stories 80, where stories come to life. From iconic fandoms to eerie legends, there's always a new world to explore. Now, let's begin Chapter 2 of New Times, Old Games. Dive in. Allara, POV. There were too many people around them. Could any of these people be the spies Uncle Bran identified? That's what worried Allara as she waited for Robb's answer. Not only that, but she also felt slightly uncomfortable in her armor, especially since she could feel her wet small clothes, already freezing cold, stuck to her skin. She pushed that feeling to the back of her mind just as Robb seemed to answer her request for speaking in private. Before he could, however, Allara cursed silently at herself when one of the guards standing over fallen White called out to Robb. "Lord Robb!" the Stark guard exclaimed, before Robb, Luwin, and Theon rushed towards the man who was surrounded by other guards. Allara could see the shocked look on their faces, so she walked in that direction. In front of her were Robb and Luwin, who looked back at her with a quizzical expression upon reaching the White's body, and Theon. It was a short walk, and the silence that followed their stop was broken by gasps from the crowd, especially Theon. Allara wondered what was so surprising about this particular White. Then she heard Theon yell, "What the fuck?" Allara could hear the disbelief and fear in the young man's voice, so she increased her stride and rushed through the crowd of guards, ending up just behind Luwin, who was crouching down, staring sideways at the dead figure on the ground. She walked around the body and stood next to Theon and Robb. She glanced at their shocked expressions before turning towards the body. She closed her eyes and shook her head before opening them again to find Luwin looking at her from his crouched position. The White's body was horribly mutilated, at least its face was, but she could still recognize the remnants of the face as that of the boy standing next to her, Theon Greyjoy. This was bad. Allara had already been told by Bran that there were only a few spies in Winterfell, given how cold and desolate the north was. She had those names in her head. If they found out about this, they could send word to King's Landing, and she didn't need any more complications right then and there. Before anyone could say anything, Allara turned to Theon, who was staring back at her in disbelief, then at Robb, who was also staring at her. "Lord Robb," Allara said, then turned her head towards the guards, then back towards Robb. She asked, "What are the names of the guards standing before us?" Everyone, especially Robb, stared at her in confusion. Allara sighed before clarifying, "I told you I know the names of spies in Winterfell." She nodded towards the guards. "I need to know their names, in case these guards are one of the spies." "I am no spy," one of the guards exclaimed, immediately followed by mutterings of anger from the others. It was as though Allara had insulted them to their faces. A part of her knew that it was an insult. They were meant to guard House Stark, and accusing them of being spies could easily be seen as an affront. It was Luwin and Robb who identified the guards. Once Allara made sure their names weren't the ones Bran had given her, a sense of relief washed over her. Allara apologized to the guards for the perceived insult before turning back towards Robb. "Please send the guards to arrest, or better yet kill, the spies in Winterfell." She then told them the names and locations of the spies, including 2 of the Stark house guards, 2 kitchen workers, 2 servants, and 2 prostitutes in the local Wintertown brothel. All this information shocked Robb and the others. Robb stared at her for a few seconds, and Allara stared back at her uncle, silently begging him to heed her warning about the spies. A heartbeat later, Robb turned to the guards and ordered them to capture the spies and bring them to the dungeons for questioning. Allara didn't agree with Robb. They must be killed, or else, if they're let go. She watched the guards nod at the acting Lord of Winterfell before glancing at the dead body of Theon on the ground. Before they could rush off to find the people Allara had mentioned, she told the guards, "Do not mention what you've seen here." The guards stared at her, then at Robb, before Allara continued. "The lives of everyone you love will be in danger if these spies somehow send word of what has happened here to King's Landing." The guards frowned at her before turning to Robb, who nodded in agreement. Robb also ordered the guards not to tell the spies anything about how they were discovered and not to mention anything about the mysterious woman in their midst. 3 of the guards were also assigned to man the entrance to the dungeons at all times. After they rushed off, everyone turned towards Allara, including the direwolves, before Theon demanded an explanation. Allara looked down at the white's body, which was well preserved due to the cold after the Night King's victory. She then looked up at Robb, Theon, and Luwin, whose eyes seemed to scan her face as he stood back up. Allara turned her head towards the guards rushing towards the castle before looking back towards Robb and the others. "What is this?" Theon pointed at his own dead body, hissing at Allara. She looked at the white, Theon as a white, and immediately knew she needed to tell them something. It was true that Bran had wanted her to tell Robb, and only Robb, everything, but that was before this particular incident. Right now she needed to improvise. Allara took a deep breath. "Maybe I'll tell them about the army of the dead for now. Everything else, from grandmother taking Tyrion Lannister to the War of the Five Kings, can be told to Uncle Robb in private." Allara nodded. She could see the 3 men waiting for an explanation. Even the dire wolves seemed as if they were waiting. "Years from now." "Years?" Robb asked with narrowed eyes. "What do you mean, years from now?" Allara noticed Luwin's eyes shift towards the Dragonbone dagger on her hip. The dagger, according to Bran, originally belonging to Aegon the Conqueror. She drew out the dagger and handed it to Luwin, who took it into his hands. She saw his eyes widen with surprise, then shook as he examined the weapon closely. "It can't be," Luwin whispered before looking at Allara. "This dagger is similar to the one used by the Catspaw to attack Lord Bran." Allara finished Luwin's words. She felt it was better to still refer to the younger version of her uncle by his title until they were alone. Nodding, she continued, "It is the same one," as Luwin handed the dagger back to her. Robb added, "It looks like the one Mother took to King's Landing." "Like I said, it is the very same," Allara sighed before continuing. "I come from many years into your future." The 3 of them stared at her, their lips parted in shock. "My name is Allara Stark. There are no more." "Robb," Luwin interrupted, glancing at the red-haired young man. Allara guessed that Robb was about to voice the same doubt Theon had, that House Stark had been extinct for thousands of years after betraying House Stark. "You should hear everything she has to say before questioning her story," Luwin advised. Robb nodded at Luwin, then at Allara, signaling her to continue. "Some of my Stark ancestors left Westeros for Essos in protest against joining House Bolton's rebellion against the king in the north at the time, Carlin Stark." Allara explained, recalling the cover story she and Bran had worked out with Sam. This was the story she was meant to use for anyone outside the Stark household who questioned her name. After the rebellion, with House Stark effectively extinct in the north, my ancestors decided to stay in Essos. Eventually, some in my family line joined the Company of the Rose following Aegon's conquest. "Yes," Luwin nodded, much to Robb and Theon's surprise. "According to records, The Company of the Rose was comprised of northerners who chose self-exile in Essos rather than live under Targaryen rule. Robb and Theon nodded in understanding before Allara continued. She fought back a shiver from the cold seeping through her soaked underclothes. Before she could be allowed into the castle, Robb, at the very least, needed to be convinced, and she knew a shortcut. Thank you, Uncle Bran, Allara thought. I suppose freezing in my small clothes is something none of us prepared for. Taking a deep breath, she said, I know my presence here is unusual, but given that my small clothes under this armor, she saw the men's faces redden slightly as she continued, are freezing wet? I will tell you something that only you and Lord Bran would know. She gestured toward Robb. Robb nodded. Before they could ask why her clothes were wet, Allara explained how the silver pool at the foot of the heart tree in the future was connected to the one in the past through Bran's use of Westeros' heightened magic. The revelation left Luwin, Theon, and Robb stunned. Magic? Luwin mumbled. Looking directly at Robb, Allara explained that some of the whites had already passed through the pool just before she entered, and now Lord Bran's ghost, or spirit, whatever you wish to call him, has told me the heart tree in the future has been destroyed. The connection has been severed. Now that she had their full attention, Allara shared the story Bran had told her. As she spoke, Robb's lips parted in shock, opening and closing like a fish. No one knew of the story except for... Robb whispered after Allara recounted an incident in which he had frightened Sansa. Not even father and mother. Lord Bran told me, Allara said, that if you did not believe me, I was to tell you that story. However, since he and I misjudged how cold I would be beneath this armor, I thought it best to tell you now, before asking for warm chambers and a bath. She then remembered an important detail that nearly slipped her mind. And I believe I should ask for bread and salt? It seems as if bread and salt are not required in the future, Luwin noted. In the time I come from, the world as you know it is no more, Allara replied. She turned to Robb, her expression grave. Lord Bran asked that I speak to you in private, at least after I have dried. Our future, your future, the future of this realm depends on it. I will sit along with the Maester, Theon started, but Allara interrupted him. What I have to say is only for the Lord, or acting Lord, of Winterfell, she said firmly. She met Theon's scowling grey gaze before he turned to Robb, clearly ready to argue. Before Theon could speak, Allara addressed Robb again. My lord, there are other sensitive matters I must discuss with you. It concerns the North, your father, and your family. What about my family? Robb asked, his expression instantly shifting to worry. What happens to them in the future? That is something we must speak of in private, Allara insisted. But first, I ask for bread and salt, warm lodgings, a warm hearth, and a warm bath. She met Robb's eyes, pressing her lips together. She didn't know these men, and she was placing an enormous amount of trust in Robb, hoping he would extend the same courtesy to her, especially after hearing Bran's story. Glancing at Theon, she recalled the stories she had been told about him. He was a turncloak who betrayed the Starks, was tortured by the Boltons, and reduced to an animal-like state, but eventually he found redemption. The first step being when he fled Winterfell with Sansa, while Ramsay and his army fought Stannis and his men. But that was a conversation for later. Right now, she was freezing and needed to dry off before discussing anything further. Mr. Luwin, Robb said after a pause, see to it that Lady Allara is given a warm room, a bath, food, and bread and salt. Before Allara could request clothes, Robb added, and see that she is given warm clothing while her armor dries. Thank you, Allara said with a nod as Luwin confirmed the order. Robb looked at her seriously. After you have eaten, we will speak of, well, whatever it is you have to say about the future. Allara offered a small smile before allowing Luwin to lead her toward the castle. As she walked away, she overheard Theon whisper urgently, Robb, you can't believe her. I mean, the future? You can't. Then how did she know about that incident, Theon? Robb countered. As Allara glanced back over her shoulder, she saw Theon struggling for an answer. As she strode through the godswood with Luwin by her side, Allara looked up at the blue, cloudless sky before turning her head away. She could see the sky, where once thick clouds had covered the heavens, blocking most of the light and warmth of the sun. Now only wisps of white floated high above. It was amazing, simply amazing. Allara turned towards Luwin, who quickly averted his gaze just as they reached the entrance to the godswood. Beyond it, the castle was full of life, bustling with people going about their business. It took them nearly 15 minutes of walking in silence through courtyards, then to the Maester's quarters to retrieve some keys, and back through the many hallways of the castle before they arrived at a closed door. Allara marveled at the quiet majesty of Winterfell, something she was certain Luwin had noticed. When the Maester opened the door, he revealed a stone-walled room with sparse comforts, a simple table with 2 chairs, a cabinet against one wall, a comfortable-looking bed draped in thick woolen blankets, and an unlit hearth facing the bed. Stepping inside, she immediately noticed the room's warmth compared to the chilly corridors. Her mother had once told her about the pipes running through the castle walls, which helped heat many of the rooms. Now she was experiencing it for herself. Lady Allara, Luwin said, standing beside the unused hearth. I will send someone to light the fire so you may dry your armor and clothes. Thank you, Allara replied. I will also arrange for additional clothing. Luwin rubbed his chin as he studied her. Though I am uncertain of the fit until one of the seamstresses who makes Lady Sansa's garments can take your measurements. Allara nodded. Something simple will suffice for the meantime, Maester. She hesitated before adding, I realize my arrival is unexpected. I just need something to wear for the next few days before I set off again. A questioning look crossed Luwin's face, but before he could ask anything, Allara continued, I'll explain everything later, Maester. I believe it would be best to speak with you and Lord Robb after I have rested and eaten. Luwin nodded. He then gestured to another door, which he opened to reveal a wooden tub set flush against the wall. Pointing to a circular plug, he explained that it blocked one of the many pipes in the wall through which hot water from the natural springs beneath Winterfell flowed. I will have a serving girl prepare a bath for you, he said, adding that bread and salt would be sent up along with the meal. Allara nodded once more. Thank you, Maester. Perhaps you could meet with Lord Robb after sunset? Luwin suggested. Allara smiled and nodded in agreement. With that, Luwin turned and left, closing the door behind him. Alone at last, Allara took a deep breath before slowly exhaling, her gaze sweeping across the room once more. Walking over to the hearth, she began undoing the straps securing her armor. She carefully removed each piece, setting them on the floor, then slipped off her forearm bracers, ensuring the hidden blades were not deployed. Placing them on the table, she continued stripping off her armor, followed by her undershirt and riding leathers, until she stood in her small clothes, waiting for someone to light the hearth. At least the room is warm, even without the fire, she thought. Sitting on the edge of a chair, Allara's mind wandered. She wondered where in the castle her mother, father, aunt, and grandparents resided. More than anything, she hoped her mission would be successful, that she would be able to prevent the War of the Five Kings. She, Bran, and Sam had discussed various ways to stop the war. If they prevented Tyrion's kidnapping by Lady Catelyn, conflict might still erupt. The greatest threat to peace was Cersei Lannister's relentless ambition. The woman would find a way to kill Robert Baratheon and spark war. Then there was Ned Stark. If he uncovered the truth about Cersei and Jaime's incest and the bastardy of Robert's supposed children, he might tell the king. Robert, in his fury, could lash out uncontrollably, leading to war with the Lannisters. Allara understood that assassination might become necessary to eliminate Cersei, Joffrey, and others to prevent an all-out war. But that was the last resort. Their best hope was ensuring King Robert's survival. After defeating the dead, only then can we consider placing Jon on the throne, Bran had said during the planning meetings days before Allara departed for Winterfell. She and Sam had agreed any attempt to put Jon on the Iron Throne before the war against the dead could fracture the realm, leading to the very future she was trying to prevent. A soft knock on the door pulled Allara from her thoughts. A blushing young girl entered to light the hearth, stealing occasional glances at her. Moments later, an older woman arrived, carrying 2 jugs from which a faintly sweet scent wafted. While the girl tended to the fire, the older woman carried the jugs into the adjoining room, where Allara soon heard the gentle rush of water filling the tub. Steam rose as the woman poured the contents of the jugs into the bath. When the water from the exposed pipe ceased flowing, the woman turned to Allara. "Milady, the bath is ready. If you wish, Alia here," she gestured towards the younger girl, "can assist you." Allara smiled at the girl before shaking her head. "That's quite all right. I can bathe myself." She then turned to the older woman and thanked her as well. Both women bowed their heads slightly before exiting the room and closing the door behind them. Allara stepped into the bathing chamber, gazing at the warm water, where flower petals floated on the surface, releasing a fragrance that filled the space. She couldn't quite place the scent, but it was soothing. She removed her small clothes, placed them on a chair, and pushed it towards the hearth. Arranging the rest of her armor near the fire, she finally stepped into the tub, sighing in relief as the warmth enveloped her body. She closed her eyes, allowing the water to soothe her, and she dreamed. She dreamed of Sansa holding her as a babe. She dreamed of Jon tossing her into the air as a toddler, catching her as she squealed with delight. She dreamt of curling up in Sansa's lap as a little girl, listening to stories of Winterfell and the Starks. She dreamt of gripping her first wooden sword, practicing stances and footwork with Jon as Sansa watched on. Then the dreams darkened. She saw flames. She saw bodies burning. She heard sobbing. She watched as her parents' bodies burned alongside that of her uncle Tyrion, who had succumbed to the pox. As Tyrion's body turned to ash, she could hear the grief-stricken cries of her aunt Tisha and her grown twins. The smell of burning flesh clung to the air. Allara gasped, snapping her eyes open. The knock on her door jolted her back to reality. Panting, she glanced at the fire in the hearth, then towards the window. The dream had been so vivid, too vivid. Even now, she could almost smell the lingering stench of the fire. Shaking her head, she took a deep breath, willing herself to calm down. But the knocking persisted. "Lady Allara!" It was Maester Luwin who spoke from the other side of the door. As she wiped her face with scented water, Allara responded. "Yes, Maester?" "Lord Robb would meet you whenever you are ready." Allara nodded. even though Luwin stood behind the closed door. As I am unsure where to go, please arrange for an escort within the hour. After Luwin answered in the affirmative, Allara grabbed the sides of the tub and pushed herself to her feet, water beating down her body and dripping back into the bath. Stepping out, she moved into the warm room, her eyes drawn to a plate of bread and fruit beside a wooden bowl of stew. A smaller plate held a pinch of salt and 2 small cubes of bread. Someone placed these here while I was asleep, she thought before turning towards the bed. A neatly folded dark blue dress lay atop the covers, alongside a grey towel. Leaning forward, she grabbed the towel and began drying herself. She would dress, eat her fill, and then speak with Robb and Luwin about the future. Robb, POV. Robb didn't know why he felt so uneasy about meeting the strange girl found in the Godswood. The violent shaking of the ground, followed by a brilliant lance of blue light piercing the sky, had been alarming enough. But when he and his men rushed into the Godswood, they found a figure who looked eerily like his currently unconscious younger brother Bran, only older. A pit formed in Robb's stomach. Then there were the bodies, Theon among them. He still didn't know what to make of them. The corpses were scattered, their clothing soaked, as if they had walked out of the pool at the foot of the heart tree. But that was supposed to be impossible. And then there was Allara Stark, a girl who claimed to have traveled back in time. As far-fetched as her story sounded, her knowledge of the dead men, her ability to identify spies among them, and the sheer impossibility of her arrival made it difficult to dismiss outright. Robb sat beside his father's desk in the solar, with Maester Luwin occupying one of the 2 chairs across from him. He had insisted on Luwin's presence as an advisor, though he had honored Allara's request to exclude Theon, despite the Greyjoy's insistence on sitting in. And then there were the names Allara provided: captured and imprisoned men and women, including prostitutes sent by some unknown agent in King's Landing. That discovery alone convinced Robb that the others, despite their denials, were likely spies as well. They would answer for their treason after a night in the cold cells. His thoughts drifted back to Allara. She claimed to have news of my family, he reminded himself. A knock at the door broke his musings. "Come," Robb called. The door opened, revealing Allara in the hallway with a guard at her side. Robb stood and motioned for her to enter. He then turned to the guard. "Watch the entrance to the hallway. No interruptions." As after the door shut, Allara glanced at the fire in the hearth before turning to Robb. "Luwin remains," Robb stated firmly. Allara nodded. Robb sat back down. "Start from the beginning." Allara stepped towards the empty chair but hesitated. "The name of my house is not Stark." Robb exchanged a glance with Luwin, both equally confused. He was about to call her a liar, but a nagging thought held him back. She had, after all, identified the spies among them. And then came the revelation that changed everything. "The name of my house is Stark." "What?" Robb's eyebrows furrowed. "Stark," Luwin echoed. Robb stepped close to Allara, eyes narrowing. "If you are from the future, then at least one of your parents would have to be either Sansa or Arya," Luwin added, "or me." Robb's voice softened in wonder. "Are you my niece?" Allara interrupted with a small smile. "In my future, Aunt Arya died in the final battle of the second long night." Robb felt sick. "Arya died?" "No, that had to be a jest. A cruel jest." "The long night?" Luwin asked, his expression disbelieving. Robb barely registered the words. his mind consumed by the idea of Arya's death. And if Arya had died, that meant, "You are Sansa's daughter," he whispered. Luwin studied Allara, his gaze thoughtful. "And your father is?" Robb asked. "Jon." "Jon," Robb repeated, confused. He noticed the surprise flicker across Luwin's face. "Jon of House Jon Snow." Silence hung heavy in the air. "Our Jon." Robb's voice wavered. "It seems so," Luwin muttered. "Jon." Robb shook his head in disbelief. "Jon Snow. Our Jon Snow." "Yes," Allara confirmed. Robb exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. How was that possible? Sansa and Jon had barely spoken in years. He had so many questions, but for now, all he could say was, "Mother is going to love hearing about this." Then he fixed his gaze on Allara and sat back down. "Start from the beginning." Jon, POV. The wall. The next morning. The last thing Jon remembered was holding Sansa as she died in his arms. Then, nothing. Now he gasped awake, the chill in the air biting into his skin. His eyes darted around the room. This wasn't the chambers he had shared with Sansa. This is the infirmary at the wall. A hand rested on his shoulder. He turned sharply and found himself staring into a face that should not be alive. "Uncle Benjen?" "Jon," Benjen said, settling into a wooden chair beside the bed. "You gave us quite a scare." Jon shook his head, looking down at his trembling hands. "No," he whispered. "No, it can't be." Benjen chuckled. "You must have hit your head when you collapsed. I'll have Maester Aemon take a look when he returns." Jon stiffened. "Maester Aemon? The man who should have been long dead." "Uncle," Jon said slowly, dread curling in his stomach. "Where am I?" Benjen frowned. "What do you mean? You wanted to join the watch. So here we are, at the wall." Jon shook his head. No. His breath came faster. "The wall fell," he rasped. "The watch is gone. So how am I still at the wall?" Benjen's frown deepened. "What are you talking about? The wall is still standing." Jon's mind spun. "Am I dead? Is this heaven? If so, why was he at the wall? Shouldn't he be in Winterfell? Or with his mother? Or asking Prince Rhaegar all the questions that had haunted him for years?" Jon exhaled sharply, trying to still his racing heart. He turned to Benjen. "Uncle, what's the last thing you remember?" Benjen pressed his lips together. "King Robert's welcome feast at Winterfell." Jon's world tilted. "What year is it?" Benjen hesitated, then answered. Jon closed his eyes. He was in the past. Somehow, impossibly, he was in the past. To be continued.